Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Nick here with Trader PhD Ag Marketing, subbing in for Dawson as he's taking a little bit of time off this week. And as always, we're here with Eric Snodgrass from Nutrien. Eric, what do you have for us this week as far as weather is concerned?
Yeah, a week ago when we were talking, Dawson and I, the question was going to be about the heat coming in this week and its impact. And I think a lot of that narrative has to start with the moisture we've received lately. So if you just take a look at this first map, it's the last 72 hours of total accumulated precip. And there's a corridor in through here that got a pretty good, healthy drink of rainfall. Now, there was some big hail, there was some local flash flooding, but the reality of it is that this particular region right in through here just saw quite a bit of rainfall, and that probably extends all the way over into the mid-Atlantic as well. So where I think this heat's going to have its biggest effect is going to be in this particular pocket because of missed rainfall opportunities there. So let's think through this. The hail, just wanted to show you over the weekend. And back into last week, a lot of these storms have come through here and done some damage. We've heard some reports of a lot of fields that were looking pretty darn good that just got completely washed out by the heavy rains or washed out by the hail that came through that region. So there's been quite a bit of adverse weather. But we can't ignore the fact that going into this heat wave, this corridor in through here has been very, very wet. And I think that's going to be a clue to where this heat may or may not have its greatest influence. Maybe a little easier way to see it is just kind of look at the total precip we've had in terms of like climate district numbers since the start of the new month. And you can't really argue that, Nebraska, Iowa, part of Illinois has had just a phenomenal start to the month in terms of overall rainfall. If you want some stats, the Corn Belt right now, I believe 7% of corn acres are in drought, maybe 9% of soybeans. I may have those back. It doesn't matter if they're backward or not. The number's below 10% for both. And there's only pockets of regional drought that we can see. We can kind of get a hint of that if we look at the soil moisture values. Just take note that there are a few places where there's still inadequate soil moisture. So if these rains don't come through, we have some issues, but you can't argue with this. I've just chosen all the states we kind of consider the primary corn and soybean belt. I masked it for just where we grow crops. And what you've got here is the new highest NDVI values we've observed. And our records go back to about 2001. So all of that is like the setup for who's going to be able to endure the heat, coming forward. And I want to think about this. Since the middle of June, from eastern Iowa through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, we have seen some very, very consistently warm nighttime temperatures. The atmosphere has been loaded with moisture, and these overnight lows have been pretty high. What happened is all this heat came on following a cold May and cold start to June. So we were in major deficit with GDD, and then it's all been made back up, which means we've had rapid growth of a crop. Now, I learned something this last week and a half that I'd never heard of before. But apparently, with rapid corn growth, you can get the tassel still wrapped in, in leaves, and therefore you have a problem with pollination because you've not opened that up to basically pollinate crops. So I don't know how prevalent that is. I know that our own research plots, we've seen kind of a checkerboard and we peel back a few years and just don't see that everything pollinated. So there could be some underlying issue with this, even though the trade thinks this is maybe a 185 crop. I just want to bring that up because this whole area is getting pretty hot as we go forward. Already today, we've got excessive heat watches, warnings, and advisories out for a pretty large area here. And this is only going to grow as the week goes forward. So here's what I have for the minimum temperatures. We're watching for anything over 73. That would be stressful on the crop. So already quite stressful here. This is now tomorrow morning, on Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning. There might be some record low temperatures set here in parts of Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, this corner. We see the same thing going into Thursday. The heat moves a little farther to the east. I mean, these are some very, very hot nights, and we're expecting them to stay that way all the way through the weekend. Daytime temps, watch how cool the West Coast is while the Central US just bakes. A lot of mid to upper 90s, hundreds down in the lower Mississippi River Valley. That's a hot day there on Wednesday. Heat index values of like 110 in this because of how humid the air is right here in the I states. And then we just go into the weekend and it stays hot. So we know that we're going to accumulate some stress out of this. We've got places down here that are going to get over 100 stress degree days added up just in the next 7 days. And we know that it's going to be very dry and windy down in the southern plains too, which is why evaporation rates are going to be 2 to 3 inches in this area. So that may be the most impacted area. But you got to remember something. They're already harvesting the corn crop they planted and had a ton of rain on it. So you look at all that and say, no, there's going to be problems, but this is going to have problems maybe on cotton. Maybe it's going to have problems on, watching the moisture get zapped out of where we're, still harvesting some wheat. But overall, they're not unused to this in the middle of summer. So here it is. This is the ridge. Watch it come out of the east, the big blob of red over here, and just settle up by the weekend right in the middle part of the country. And what we tend to get whenever you have a ridge like this is this whole area tends to get lit up with storms, just this whole corridor in through here. But it's going to be hot. Here's your next 5 days on average. This is day 5 through 10. Look at that heat pouring in here. Now, remember, this is the hottest time of year naturally. So to be 5, 6, 7 degrees above average is quite a bit. And this takes us out day 10 through 15. All right. So back to the original story. How much does it do this while we have all the heat in place? I mean, we watched a squall line go through parts of the Dakotas last night, heavy rain out of Missouri into Illinois. It's raining really heavily over Kansas City again, which a week ago had flooding. Are we still going to crank out storms in this pattern? Well, according to the Storm Prediction Center, yes. They're also looking out for several regions this week of excessive rainfall, but I think the overall pattern looks something like this. I think every model we look at for the next 14 days says there's your stormy corridor. Expect the storms to come in lines. Okay. They may be small, they may be large, but they're going to come through here. This is the area of most rapid, I think, drought development, flash drought. But I would even say these storms get over into the mid Atlantic as well. So, probability wise, next 10 days, who's got a chance at grabbing an inch? It's a pretty large area across the Corn Belt, whereas sections of the Mid South getting down into Texas, Oklahoma, will see isolated storms, but probably not, widespread rainfall overall. So I think it's going to look something like this. This is just an animation over the next 10 days as to where that moisture is coming through. And you can see some of these rainfall totals are going to be high. And we are expecting quite a bit of thunderstorm activity, while this area is going to be much more spotty. Now, here's the big idea, okay? While that all happens, do we see that because of the heat that's getting established more in the southern plains and the drought, is that just where it's going to live? So, I mean, Nick, this is what I see over the next couple of weeks. What does this get you thinking?
Well, I would say, from watching you over the past, couple weeks, it all just kind of depends how long this sits here.
Hmm.
And like you said, where the heat is kind of setting up and developing, they're kind of on the tail end anyway. And
Yeah.
you know, but we're also, I think, an adverse part of this with those ridge riders is, when I drive around, our area, Iowa, and then up through Minnesota. I mean, there's creeks and rivers that are about at their boiling point uh,
Yeah.
up here, and I don't know how many more inches we can handle all at once before we start coming out of those banks.
I mean, look at that. The European model's trying to put 4 inches of rain down northern Iowa. Now, will it be like that? No, it won't be exactly like that. But when you see that kind of potential, it gets you thinking. And I'll tell you, these guys down here in the South are probably hoping something comes out of the tropics, but there's not a whole lot of hope there right now. There's not a whole lot going on in the tropics in the near term. So why don't we look out there a little bit longer? And I tell you what I'm going to do here. There is a feature that we're all trying to understand what it's going to do. And I know this is a graphic a lot of people, of course, most of the world doesn't even see it, but do you see this pocket right into there of these warmer colors? Okay. That represents where there's subsidence in the atmosphere. And over the next several weeks, there's going to be a line of subsidence that moves from the west to the east across the Pacific toward the Atlantic. And then this is going to show up. And you're going, well, what does that mean? Well, that's the MJO. You hear us meteorologists talk about it all the time. And here's what the idea is, okay? If the MJO does in fact set up back in the Indian Ocean, it tends to give us a pattern that looks something like this. Plants a big ridge of high pressure. See the spiraling arrows here, plus the red colors. It tends to plant a big ridge of high pressure right over the Mid-South. Whereas the Northwest United States gets cool and stormy. Now, some of the models say that's going to happen. But let's say it's wrong. Let's say it instead completely avoids that and goes back to where it's been for weeks. If it does that, we call that phase 6. Now there's low pressure moving through this area, cooler conditions, and all the heat is over in the Northwest. That would be the persistence forecast if we go back to what we saw in July. So, what are the models saying? Well, this is what the government says is going to be the front half of August. They're favoring that forecast where the MJO goes back to the Indian Ocean and just plants a big ridge of high pressure in the mid South, getting hot and dry in that area. Take a look at what our models say. This is the almost all of July, excuse me, almost all of August outlook from the GFS. It's like, no, no, no. It's going to be here that's going to be drier, and there's going to be storms that run over the edge and get this whole area wet. And so does the European model. It says the greater risk of being dry is there with storms running the whole periphery around this. So there's a bit of a model battle going right now in terms of what July is. I'm just going to tell you this, all right? If you ask me, the smartest thing to do would be over the next 2 weeks, monitor the position and strength of the ridge and see if it's got staying power. If it does, wherever it lands by the end of July, let it ride. Just wash, rinse, repeat that forecast through the front half of August. If it moves, if it slides back over to the mid south or moves all the way over toward like the Western Plains, I don't care, one or the other, then that's going to be a better indicator on where it's probably going to set up in August. And so I just want to know, is the Corn Belt going to live on the edge and get the storms like we're predicting over the next 2 weeks? Or do we have this thing settle closer to the Ohio River and we get smoked out and it gets hot and dry? That's a big if right now, but I think these next 2 weeks will give us the answer on to whether or not that's going to occur.
Yeah, he's going to be interesting. I think really either way that this unfolds, the amount of moisture that we've had, and really as good as the crop has looked up to this point. Obviously, we know it can handle a little bit of heat, a little bit of stress here in the short term, especially the corn with as early along as it is. Um, to me, though, it's the soybeans. The soybeans are a huge wild card on yield. Uh,
Sure.
yes, they've looked mostly good. My concern has actually been that they've had too much water, too wet feet all summer long,
Hmm.
and that we could have some elongating nodes, we could have some pod retention issues, and I really don't, I really don't know which way the balance flips with either forecast. Whether we continue to get rain or we don't. Is there enough
Yeah.
moisture to get the bean crop to the finish line, or does it need more rain? But it doesn't really need more rain because it's been saturated all summer.
Let me give you this piece of information. If you're in my home state of Illinois, which this is almost same true for Iowa and other states that are in the Midwest, in July and August, we typically evaporate an inch and a half of water a week. So here's the question. If we end up finding ourselves in a situation where the atmosphere doesn't give up that, give up that moisture back to the surface, in 6 weeks' time, we could be 9 inches in deficit. And you know what I'm saying? Like just all of a sudden. Now remember, that's not 9 inches in accumulated deficit. That's 9 inches, also assuming the evaporative demand stays high. So you're doing a precip minus evaporation, and that's where things can get a bit haywire.
Does I mean, this I don't know if this is a dumb question or not, but with the amount of, I mean, obviously the crop's fully canopied. Does the
Mhm.
fully canopied crop factor into that evaporation um, factor?
Yeah, it does. So when you fully canopy the crop, you start to limit the soil evaporation, and it mainly just comes off the top of the canopy. Because believe it or not, the crop can actually hold moisture underneath the canopy. It does. It just keeps it real humid environment under there. And honestly, that brings about another question for pest pressures and also for disease pressures. But we have these same questions every year. That's nothing. That's nothing new. It's just what you have to deal with when you have a hot and humid situation. But yeah, when it canopies, you limit the soil evaporation.
And that's why I think I was wondering if a little bit of reprieve here on at least the moisture might actually be somewhat of a good thing, because like I said, we're pretty saturated. Water table's pretty high here.
Hmm.
Uh, I just wonder if it could actually benefit from a little bit of a pullback, really. But
Yeah, I mean, you probably have folks saying that right here, where this has been so wet getting into this
that's
part of
right where I'm
Wisconsin.
at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you've got folks that are here that are probably saying the same thing, and then you've got people like in the parts of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan. They're like, just give us your water. We'll take every bit you want to hand over because they're sitting there looking at just in time rains, kind of keeping the crop alive, and they need more moisture. So yeah, I think you've got. I guess the way I'd put it is this way, Nick. I, I think we found a ceiling on both crops. In other words, if perfect weather is maintained, I think they probably stay at this ceiling. I don't think there's a lot of up potential in it. I just think it's a maintenance thing. I think there's risk on the downside if we get this ridge to stick around too long. And I don't think this ridge is going to be a beneficial ridge. I just don't know if it's going to be around long enough to make everything hurt. And certainly, I don't think the markets think that either. Although I know the markets are moving on a lot of other news today too. So, yeah, weather's going to be a factor, but I think right now everyone's going, okay, it's going to get hot. It's late July. Show me there's a problem before I, make a serious move.
Yeah, I'm speaking of the way the markets are moving today, it definitely doesn't seem like they're too worried about the heat ridge.
No.
And like you said, I think trade ideas or maybe lack thereof today, I think is dominating the trade, and then taking a step back a little bit from last week's run. Before I get too off topic, we're talking about trade price action. One last question about weather.
Sure.
That Mexican drought. Is it
Mhm.
is it busted?
It's been improving pretty dramatically. We'll see if we can pull this up relatively quickly here. I'll just go to Weather Bell. That's a good website. So if we just have a look at what's going on with the recent precipitation in Mexico, here you can kind of see it here. Over the last 30 days, this would be anomalies. I mean, look at that. There's been plenty of moisture that's got into Mexico as basically what's happened is the Bermuda High starts here, kind of goes off my map, but it's been absolutely massive, just shoving moisture around the corner. And that's what's filled this whole area. And so, yes, I'd say the drought in Mexico, for the most part, you're still going to have regional pockets that didn't grab a storm or two, but everyone else, I think they've gotten it.
Been keeping an eye on that because obviously they've been our number one importer here for quite some time, and so I think keeping an eye on their production situation, I think is going to be huge. I mean, granted, there are some cattle backing up that they're going to have to try to figure out a way to feed, but keeping an eye on their production over the next year or two is going to be um, good to do. Well, with that, Eric, is there anything else weather-wise that we need to be informed about?
No, I told Dawson last week, and I'll just mention it again. There is mounting evidence that we're going to find ourselves in a La Nina pattern through fall and into winter. And that'll be just the next piece of the puzzle that helps us understand how harvest is going to go, what the hurricane season is going to look like, and then finally how we slide into winter. And at that point, I think my biggest concern isn't going to be about North America, but it'll be about the start of the Brazilian monsoon. If La Nina does, in fact, have a control on the weather patterns, they tend to get an early start to the monsoon. And to be honest, seeing where corn prices have gone and where if this crop stays where it is and soybeans perform as well, an early monsoon is when it comes to the market discussion on the weather side of it, it just pushes the prices down.
Yeah,
So if
there.
you want me to tell you what I would tell everybody in the States that they would want an El Nino fall and winter just to back off on this early start to the monsoon, and I don't see it just yet.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep that in mind moving forward. And I guess it is it's about that time of year to start looking towards our winter weather, and then obviously the new crop started down there in South America. So we'll keep an eye on that and think of some more questions for you there as we start heading that direction. So
All right.
with that, it was good talking to you, Eric, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Sounds good.